red breaking news banner rippled across phones, tablets, smartwatches everywhere. It blinked like a siren. Elon Musk lays off 10,000 employees across Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, all in a single day. The digital world paused, then erupted. Twitter feeds exploded. CNBC anchors gasped on live TV. Slack channels buzzed like alarm bells. For a moment, the tech industry felt like it had stopped breathing. Inside Tesla's Fremont factory, entire teams stood frozen mid-task, staring at their screens. A project manager in Austin burst into tears mid-meeting. Software engineers at Neuralink watched their calendars vanish, emails bouncing back with chilling auto-replies, no longer with the company. It was surgical, brutal, absolute. At the center of the storm was Elon Musk, seated at a minimalist desk in his private compound. The room was silent except for the occasional hum of an AI assistant monitoring the network. He stared at his monitor, a map showing workforce reduction across continents. No emotion crossed his face. Then, in the same breathless calm, he used to launch rockets. He opened X and typed, "Sometimes you must burn the forest to grow it back stronger. Efficiency greater than comfort. #reset." The tweet went live. The retweets began. Then came the backlash. Inside boardrooms across Silicon Valley, executives scrambled. Phone calls, emergency meetings, legal reviews. A collective paranoia was spreading. If Musk can drop 10,000 in a day, what are we waiting for? One by one, CEOs began quietly drafting scenarios, prepping HR statements, updating layoff templates. At Googleplex, the air was different. Still, waiting. On the top floor, Sundar Pichai stood in his office with the blinds half drawn, watching sunlight spill over the green courtyard below. His phone vibrated nonstop on the desk behind him, but he didn't move. A TV on mute showed Elon walking briskly past press cameras, face unreadable. Below the footage, a banner scrolled. Is this the start of a new tech reckoning? Sundar didn't blink. His eyes narrowed slightly, reading between the lines. He understood what Musk had done and why. It was not just about costs. It was about control, power, resetting the rules of engagement. The chessboard had changed. Behind Sundar, his executive team stood quietly. Their faces were pale, their minds racing. He could feel it, what they weren't saying. The unspoken fear crackling in the room like static. One executive finally stepped forward. "Should we begin drafting a response plan?" she asked. Sundar turned slowly. His face gave away nothing. For a moment, the room felt like the eye of a storm. He said nothing, but his silence wasn't passive. It was thinking, calculating, feeling. Outside the conference room, whispers floated through Google's halls. Engineers huddled near whiteboards, not talking code, but contingency. Admins refreshed their inboxes, waiting for the HR memo that hadn't arrived yet. Fear was a scent palpable, rising like smoke. In cafeterias, employees scrolled through X, watching the chaos unfold. Some admired Musk's ruthlessness, others whispered about betrayal. But nearly all were wondering the same thing. Is Google next? And somewhere deep in the nervous heartbeat of Silicon Valley, a truth was forming. This wasn't just a business decision. This was a moment that would divide leadership into two camps, those who would follow and those who would resist. Sundar Pichai hadn't moved yet, but the world was already watching. The room was still heavy with silence. Sundar Pichai stood at the edge of the glass wall in his office, watching clouds roll slowly across the Palo Alto sky. Below him, the Google campus was alive with tension. Engineers pacing courtyards with phones pressed to their ears, managers clustering in conference rooms, everyone pretending to be busy but truly waiting, watching him. He could feel the weight of it pressing in from every corner of the company, the unspoken fear that they were next, that Google, the last great holdout of tech stability, was about to crack under the same brutal logic that had gutted 10,000 jobs overnight. His inbox was a minefield. Investor pressure, board members demanding an emergency session, internal analytics teams showing productivity to salary charts blinking in red. His finance chief had already sent a 3-line recommendation: begin phased cuts. Quietly, we suggest starting with 6%. It sat there, cold and mechanical, but Sundar didn't open it. Instead, he opened a different tab, a photo, grainy, scanned, from a printout nearly to decades old. Him and his father on a dusty street in Chennai, standing beside a scooter. His father's hand rested proudly on his shoulder. Their faces worn, but full of something that didn't exist in the algorithm-ridden world he now led. Faith. He remembered the way his father had saved for a year to buy him his first computer. The way he had said, no matter how far you go, Sundar, don't forget real leaders build people, not numbers. Sundar turned from the window and walked to his desk. He didn't call a meeting. He didn't check with legal. He typed an internal email, just 92 words, no preamble, no PR filter. I know what you're all thinking. I've seen it in the halls, in your faces. So let me say it plainly, there will be no layoffs. Not now. Not like this. We will navigate this storm. Together, our value is in you. Let's rise, not retreat. Sundar. He hovered over Sen. A voice in his head whispered, you'll be crucified for this. Another voice, quieter but stronger, whispered back, good. He clicked. The ripple was immediate. Phones buzzed, monitors lit up, gas echoed. Down corridors, some employees cried, others froze. Screenshots of the email were leaked within minutes. It hit X, Reddit, LinkedIn. Hashtags formed. Hashtag Google stance. Hashtag no layoffs here. Hashtag PICHA I promise dot, but not everyone was cheering. Within the hour, media headlines sharpened their knives. Pichai gambles company stability on emotion. Will compassion bankrupt Google? Is this the end of shareholder capitalism? In a penthouse office in Manhattan, a hedge fund manager slammed his espresso down on a polished desk and muttered, he's gone soft. Inside Google's boardroom, the tremors had begun. 3 directors scheduled an unscheduled vote. 1. Quietly called a replacement candidate in case Sundar didn't last a quarter. Back in Mountain View, Sundar stepped out of his office and began walking floor by floor, department by department. No cameras, no entourage, just him. People stood when they saw him, not out of protocol, but because he showed up. One engineer, visibly shaken, asked him, do you really think this is going to work? Sundar looked him in the eye. I think you're going to make it work. That night, while other CEOs drafted layoff scripts, Sundar launched something different, a global internal initiative born out of the chaos. He called it Project Rise, a challenge, not a command. Employees from every continent were invited to propose ideas, tools, platforms, partnerships that could either generate new revenue or massively reduce costs. Within 100 days, there were no committees, no gatekeepers. If an idea worked, it would be funded immediately. And if it didn't, then at least they would fall forward together. The next morning, Sundar sat in a silent cafeteria long before sunrise. Steam curled from his untouched coffee. Across from him, a young coder sat nervously holding a rough prototype on a tablet and eye-powered tool. To help digitize education in war zones, Sundar leaned in, not as a CEO, but as a believer. Let's build it, he said. And in that moment, Project Rise became something more than a policy. It became a revolution, but far beyond those halls, unseen in the shadows. Something or someone was already working to tear it all down before it could even begin. The hum of creation was beginning to pulse through the halls of the Googleplex, like electricity through a storm cloud. The first wave of Project Rise had landed dozens of prototypes, strategy outlines, scrappy pitch decks from teams that hadn't touched innovation in years. They came from every corner: Zurich, Lagos, Toronto, Tokyo. Ideas not born from executive strategy, but desperation, vision, and something rarer, belief. Sundar Pichai read through them one by one. A group in Nairobi pitched a lightweight diagnostic AI for remote hospitals. A Warsaw team was rebuilding an internal tool to cut cloud infrastructure costs by 60%. Another team to interns and a junior PM proposed a browser extension for the visually impaired. Some were flawed, some were brilliant, all were alive. But brilliance alone would not be enough. Not now. Because on a rainy Thursday morning, the illusion of safety shattered. The blow came not from the press, or shareholders, or Elon Musk, but from deep inside Washington. A government contract one Sundar had fought quietly to secure over. The past 2 years was gone. It was clean, clinical. A short email from the Department of Infrastructure Renewal. Due to strategic realignment and fiscal constraints, the current agreement will not be renewed. Just like that, the backbone of several key infrastructure projects touching everything from smart city integration to green energy analytics was severed. The funding, gone. The safety net, gone. The impact, over 7,000 jobs indirectly tied to that contract were now dangling over a cliff. Sundar read the email alone in his office. Outside, the sky bruised with gathering clouds. He didn't move for 10 minutes. Not a breath. Not a blink. He didn't call legal. He didn't call PR. He walked. He took the elevator down to the basement level where the infrastructure division occupied a quiet, unglamorous wing of the campus. No press releases came from here. No shiny product launches. Just silent work that held up the digital skeleton of half the world. He stepped inside. Conversations died mid-sentence. Monitors paused mid-code. Dozens of engineers looked up, stunned. Sundar stepped forward and said only for words, "We just lost everything." A silence thicker than fear followed. He continued, "I don't have a fix, but I don't believe the solution is somewhere else. I believe it's in this room. So here's what I'm asking. Help me find the impossible answer. Build with me." He didn't preach. He didn't command. He simply stood, open-palmed and exhausted, but unwavering, and something remarkable happened. One engineer stepped forward, then another, then 20. They began sketching ideas on whiteboards, pulling code from old archives, making calls. A war room formed not out of crisis protocol, but conviction. The air buzzed, not with fear, but purpose, across the company. The ripple spread. The canceled contract wasn't announced, but somehow everyone felt it. Project Rise was no longer just a morale move. Now it was survival. In a video conference room in Dublin, a group of analysts who hadn't shipped a product in 3 years suddenly pitched an high-powered resource allocator for global refugee logistics. In Singapore, an ex-security engineer proposed a lean, decentralized identity system for developing nations. In Brazil, someone unearthed an abandoned food supply tracking app from 2018 and began rewriting the code in a shared Notion doc. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even coherent. But it was working. Hope, messy and fragile, had returned. Then just as it all began to hum, something else arrived. Not ATHUND or CLAP. Not a leak. Something far quieter. A line of corrupted code appeared in the internal system logs of the Rise dashboard. At first, no one noticed. Then a meeting invite disappeared. A shared document reverted to an older version. A critical pitch email failed to send. Then another, and another. Within 48 hours, 3 top-level prototypes failed to compile during internal reviews. Despite passing checks just days earlier, the engineers were baffled. Logs showed no errors, no tampering. It was as if the system itself had turned off key. That's when Kean, head of systems security, got involved. He wasn't the kind of man who panicked. He had worked in war zones, consulted on cybercrime takedowns, once rebuilt an entire security framework in a hotel lobby during a blackout. But now, as he reviewed the Rise infrastructure back end, he leaned in, squinted, and muttered something no one wanted to hear. This isn't a bug. He began tracing the anomalies. Each one came from a ghost account, admin level access, no recent login history, masked IPs. Someone had burrowed into the core of Project Rise like a virus hiding in the nervous system. Not to destroy, to degrade, to slow, to confuse, to break momentum without leaving fingerprints. Sabotage. And that's when Sundar realized someone was inside his house, watching, waiting. Not to strike, but to undo. Project Rise had awakened the heart of the company. Now, someone wanted it to bleed. And they were already pulling the thread. For 2 days, the sabotage looked like coincidence. A missed meeting here, a corrupted file there. Engineers blamed their own code. Product managers chalked it up to bandwidth lag or cloud sync issues. It was just noise. They told themselves glitches in the gears of a machine suddenly spinning faster than ever. But Sundar Pichai wasn't fooled. He had seen this before, not in his spreadsheets, but in people. Patterns that formed just beneath the surface, missteps that seemed innocent until they began to dance in sync. KEO and confirmed what Sundar feared. Someone was inside the system, not breaking it, slowing it, systematically, intentionally. Kean traced it to a single dormant admin credential, buried under layers of old server logs. It was an old account, deactivated over a year ago, but someone had reactivated it with a digital fingerprint, so carefully masked that even the internal detection systems hadn't noticed. The access trail led nowhere, or rather, everywhere. The saboteur had used shared workstations, remote proxies, even smart coffee machines as entry points. This wasn't vandalism. It was surgical. A war of attrition being fought in silence. Sundar didn't make it public. Not yet. He knew the cost of panic, and worse, he didn't know who to trust. Project Rise had pulled in over 3,000 Googlers from 17 countries. If the saboteur was internal, they were swimming in a sea of believers and perhaps pretending to be one themselves. He called a private meeting with 3 people only, Kian from systems, Ella his chief of staff, and Dev, his most discreet strategist. They met in an unmarked break room with the camera lenses taped over and a white noise generator buzzing softly in the corner. Sundar stood at the window, arms crossed. "We're not dealing with a leaker," he said quietly. "This is something else. They're not after attention. They're after collapse." Dev's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if this isn't about money?" Kian nodded. "It isn't. Whoever this is, they understand our systems too well. This is personal." Ella leaned forward. "We've been looking for enemies in the media, in the markets. Maybe the real threat never left the building." They all knew what that meant. Someone inside Google, maybe even inside Project Rise, wanted it to fail, and they were winning. Because just that morning, one of the most promising pitches from Brazil, a rural internet tool designed to bring data analytics to farmers, was derailed during a demo. The prototype glitched out mid-presentation. The team was humiliated. Their investor backed out within an hour. No one could explain what went wrong, except Kian. He pulled up the server logs and pointed to a single edit made at 3:47 a.m. from a location that technically didn't exist. The IP traced to a public Wi-Fi node encrypted and rerouted through a compromised dev account. It wasn't sabotaged by destruction. It was sabotaged by humiliation. That's when Sundar made the most dangerous decision of all. He chose to walk into the fire. The next day, without notice, he began personally visiting every team involved in Project Rise. He didn't arrive with security. He didn't schedule meetings. He simply showed up, crashing into cafeterias, whiteboard sessions, bug SCRUMS. And he watched. Listened. Not just to the words, but to the silences, the way people looked at one another, who avoided eye contact, who controlled what data was shared. He started building a map not of infrastructure, but of trust. Everywhere he went, he repeated one phrase: "If someone wants to break this, let them try. We'll build it faster." It became a rallying cry, but inside him, the clock was ticking. Then came the break. Kian, deep in the backend systems, found a series of echo commands running silently through a mirror log, commands designed to override document versions and hide source edits. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was espionage, and the account tied to it belonged to a developer who no longer worked at Google. Or so they thought. Her name was Maya Thorne. 3 years ago, Sundar had hired her to lead strategy innovation. Brilliant, relentless, cold under pressure, she had helped design the early infrastructure of what became Project Rise. But she left quietly after a heated disagreement with executive leadership about the direction of AI integration. No press, no scandal, just disappeared. Now, she was back, or at least her access was. Kian found her credentials pinging remote servers from overseas, routing through servers in Singapore, then to a satellite relay in Estonia. There were timestamps, digital footprints, and one recent login attempt from inside the Plex. Sundar's breath caught. She hadn't just returned digitally, she might be back in person. The next morning, a small envelope appeared on Sundar's desk. No signature, no address. Inside was a single printed message: "You can't lead with your heart and expect to survive. Cut them, Sundar, before they cut you." No one saw who delivered it, but Sundar knew exactly what it meant. The saboteur wasn't just trying to kill Project Rise, they were trying to prove him wrong, and they were willing to burn everything to do it. Night had fallen over Mountain View, but inside the Googleplex, the war had just begun. Project Rise was no longer a quiet experiment in resilience. It had become a battleground, not one of weapons or headlines, but of ideology, of faith, of power, and Sundar Pichai stood alone at the center, holding onto a belief no one else dared stake their careers on, that in a system addicted to fear, trust could still win. But that belief was being tested by the hour. Kian's investigation had uncovered more than a sabotage trail. It had unearthed a machine of misdirection. Maya Thorne's fingerprints were everywhere: masked logins, silent backdoors, subtle code corruptions. Yet every technical trace came wrapped in legal ambiguity. Nothing blatant, nothing overt. Just enough to discredit Project Rise without making a single move that would stand in court. It was psychological warfare, and it was working internally. Murmurs had begun to swirl. Once unshakable engineers were now questioning the viability of their work. Senior managers grew tense in meetings, watching their every word. HR fielded anonymous complaints about leadership instability, Ella's internal communication. Team found leaked emails circulating on forums, painting Sundar as recklessly idealistic. And then the biggest blow landed. A major funding partner, a global edtech investor prepared to pour $150 million into the rural learning app, suddenly walked away. No explanation, just a terse, formal notice, change in strategic direction. Sundar didn't need to read between the lines. Maya had gotten to them. And worse, the board had noticed. They convened an unscheduled session behind closed doors without Sundar. The agenda: evaluation of strategic risk. A proxy for a single question: is Sundar fit to lead through crisis, or has he become the crisis himself? Ella intercepted the memo and rushed to his office. "They're preparing a vote," she said, her voice flat. "Ask Stormy. If they move forward with it, you could be out in 3 weeks." Sundar didn't answer right away. He stood in the middle of the room, the setting sun casting a gold line across the carpet. In his hand, he held the envelope. Maya had left the message still ringing in his mind like a dare. "Cut them before they cut you. She wants me to fold," he said finally. "She wants me to admit the system can't work without fear." Ella stepped closer. "And what if she's right?" He looked at her, calm. "Then I lose. But not by becoming her." That night, Sundar did something radical. He gathered his core leadership not in a conference room, but in the old auditorium on the North Campus. No presentation, no slides, just silence and truth. When the room was full, he stepped onto the stage and said, "You've heard the rumors. You know what's at stake. Some of you are already planning for what happens if I'm removed. That's fine. Prepare. But understand, this Project Rise isn't about me. It's about proving that we don't have to lead through fear to survive. That people, when trusted, when challenged, when believed in, will rise higher than any metric ever predicted." He paused, letting the silence settle like ash. "If you stay with me, if you fight with me, you do so not to protect the job. You do it to prove that humanity and scale are not mutually exclusive. But if you can't believe that, I understand. I won't hold you." He stepped down, walked straight through the center aisle, and left. No applause, no fanfare, just an idea, left burning in the room like a fuse. The next morning, something began to shift. Voluntarily, unprompted, over 200 employees submitted letters declaring their commitment to Rise, even if it meant defying their own department heads. Mid-level managers refused to participate in the quiet transition planning the board had initiated. A few even leaked their own emails to media outlets in Sundar's defense. Hashtags trended again. Hashtag we rise with him. Hashtag fearless leadership. Hashtag no going back. But none of that stopped what came next. A sealed message appeared on Sundar's private terminal, untraceable. No sender. Inside was a single video feed. Grainy, low-light footage from a surveillance camera inside the boardroom. It showed Harrison Greer, the powerful, calculating board member known for smiling through every knife he placed. He was speaking to someone off camera. "Once the vote is called, we'll move fast. Sundar's out. Maya steps in as interim. We'll sunset Project Rise under the banner of fiscal responsibility. Frame it as a pivot. The media will eat it up." The camera panned just slightly, enough to reveal the face of the person seated across from Greer. It wasn't Maya. It was Thomas Young, former senior engineer. The man Sundar had once confronted in Singapore, the saboteur turned remorseful insider. Except now, he wasn't remorseful. He was smiling. Sundar stared at the screen. To Betrayals, one board, and 0 time left. The real coup had begun. It rained the morning of the vote. Not a hard rain, just a cold, deliberate drizzle that slicked the glass walls of the Googleplex and made the sky feel like it was holding its breath. Employees passed quietly through security checkpoints, heads down, earbuds in, but no one was really listening to music. They were listening to tension, the kind that wraps around a place like a wire, the kind that means something is about to break. Inside, the boardroom was a battlefield disguised as a table, 13 chairs. 12 of them already occupied. At the head sat Harrison Greer, calm, polished, the architect of Sundar Pichai's quiet removal, his fingers laced, his silver watch gleaming. To his left sat Thomas Young, exiled engineer turned strategic advisor. His presence was technically informal. His influence, anything but. The seat at the far end remained empty. Until it wasn't. Sundar entered the room alone. No assistant. No laptop. Just a single folder in his hand. Greer didn't rise. No one did. That was the ritual. The quiet signal that the target was no longer equal, just present. Sundar took his seat and placed the folder on the table. Greer leaned forward. Mr. Pichai, thank you for joining us. We're here today to consider a motion for strategic leadership reassignment specifically. Your position as CEO. Sundar didn't blink. Before we vote, Greer continued. You have 5 minutes, should you wish to make a closing statement. Sundar nodded slowly. He didn't open his folder. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke. I was hired not to keep this company safe, but to keep it human, to make sure that while we scale, we don't forget who we are, that we don't become machines mimicking empathy for optics, that when the winds of fear blow through our industry, we anchor ourselves to people, not panic. He looked around the room. Project Rise was never about numbers. It was about proving that belief is not a weakness, that trust is not a liability, that kindness is not a flaw in the algorithm, it is the operating system itself. A few board members shifted in their seats. You can vote me out today. You probably will. But know this: Google didn't grow because it followed fear. It grew because somewhere, someone believed a better internet, a better tool, a better future was possible. He stood up. No anger, no defense, just a quiet exhale. If you think cutting me restores stability, fine. But don't lie to yourselves. What you're cutting is not a CEO. It's the last defense against becoming just another machine that runs cold. Then, for the first time, he opened the folder. Inside were not numbers, not forecasts, but stories, printed pages, dozens of them. Letters from employees, users, farmers in Argentina, students in rural Kenya, teachers in India. Letters that spoke not of profit, but of change. He slid the folder down the table. You want to run the company by the book. I understand. But just once, I dare you to read these pages instead. And he walked out. He didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. He didn't look back. Outside, under the gray sky, hundreds of Googlers stood in silent formation. Engineers, designers, admins, interns, holding handmade signs that read only one thing: we rise. In that moment, it wasn't about the vote. It was about the soul of the company. Back in the boardroom, silence stretched long. Then the vote began. One by one, digital signatures lit up. Greer watched. Expression unreadable. 8, 9. Then -10. Sundar was done. Or so it seemed, because just as Greer reached to finalize the motion, a voice rang out from the end of the table. I'm changing my vote. Heads turned. It was Joseph Tanaka, the longest-serving board member, rarely vocal, but always listening. I've watched this company survive because of innovation, he said. But this is the first time I've seen it survive because of integrity. I won't vote against that. His screen flashed red. Vote rescinded. Then another voice. I rescind as well. 2 votes gone. Then a third. Greer sat frozen. The final tally landed at 6-7. Sundar stayed. And Thomas Young, he was silent. Because in the final moment, even he could not argue against the quiet revolution Sundar had ignited. A revolution, not a code or capital, but a conviction. Hours later, in the privacy of his office, Sundar sat alone. He didn't celebrate. He simply stared at the folder of letters now dog-eared and coffee-stained, and whispered to himself. The system tried to delete belief, and belief rewrote the system. And then, just as the rain began to break, Ella stepped inside holding a message. It was an email from Maya Thorne. No subject, no greeting, just a single line. I was wrong, and you were right to never stop showing up. Attached was a finely AI-powered public infrastructure tool designed for disaster relief zones. Built anonymously. Tested quietly, ready for deployment. The code name, Sundar. Because in a world that mistook silence for weakness, he had become the storm. And in doing so, he had changed everything.